My name's Dr. Ben Bikman. I'm a professor and biomedical scientist who studies metabolic disorders, and much of my focus is to explore how the humble hormone insulin impacts health and disease. We typically only think of insulin as being relevant to health and controlling blood sugar, but too much of it starts to cause metabolic mayhem. And I'm glad to be able to share some of my insight in the Men's Health Matters series with Tracy. As a fellow, to me, it's important that I have my health so that I can be, first and foremost, a very involved member of my community and my family. First and foremost, with my family, being a husband and a father is the most important thing to me. And I really want to make sure that I am, if you will, the best provider and protector. That's sort of how I look at my two roles in the family primarily. And I want to be able to work hard so that I'm providing well for my family. And I always want to be, frankly, physically capable that I can protect them in even the most dire of circumstances. But also, even beyond the role that I have now as husband and father, the moment my first child was born, so in other words, the moment I became father, I actually could, in a way, see the day when I would be grandfather. And that's a big part of my motivation. It's not going to be hard for me to be healthy and capable while my kids are still mine at home. But I'm really thinking another decade away when they have children of their own. And I'm imagining the kind of grandpa that I want to be. And so for me, as a man and a member of my family and community, I want to be very capable. And my health matters to more than just my own selfish interests, where I want to go play some sports with my buddies. It's more important to that. A healthy, strong man is not only helpful to himself, but he's a blessing to those around him. And I very much, I take that view to heart, and any sentiment that I can share that helps another fellow feel the same way, and not only feel that way, but also actually take the steps to realize that benefit to him and those around him, I'm happy to do it. Yeah, my thoughts have certainly changed over the years, and I've benefited from being a biomedical scientist where I've been able to rely on just the hard, cold data. Like everyone else, I had thought for years that the key to optimal metabolic health for everyone, including men, was that I needed to be calorically balanced, that I needed to watch my calories and how much I was expending, as well as avoid saturated fat. And what's certainly evolved for me is, one, I do not believe anyone should ever be afraid of calories to the point that they're counting them. That's not to say energy doesn't matter, the amount of food we're eating. It matters, but that's going to be taken care of if a person is more mindful of their macronutrients. And that kind of allows me to kind of segue into that other point about saturated fat. What's so ironic, especially with regards to men, is that there are well-done studies that have tracked the testosterone levels in men and sperm production in men who deliberately adopt low-fat diets, what we've been told to do for decades now. And the further a man's dietary fat gets, the lower his testosterone levels become, and the greater he experiences a reduction in sperm production. So the less fat a man eats, the less manly he's becoming, unfortunately. And anyway, my point being, my thoughts on being a healthy, strong man have certainly evolved with regards to nutrition. And nowadays, I don't believe any fellow, and I certainly don't have any fear of calories, as I noted. It should just be eat satisfying, nutrient-dense foods, especially not avoiding the protein-heavy foods that come with fat, and that's often going to have saturated fat in them, and cholesterol. And cholesterol is the backbone of all sex hormones. If a man wants to make testosterone, he better make sure he has enough cholesterol. That is literally the building block that the body will use in order to create testosterone, and not that testosterone is the only thing that matters. It's just an important one, certainly. And it's one that we can point to, and it's one that we all are familiar with. So don't fear fat. And maybe one last point, although this isn't necessarily an evolution in my thinking, but men need strong muscles. It is something that we naturally have been given. And the fact that a man's muscles get so much bigger and stronger during puberty relative to his female counterparts, I think that it's something we should embrace and acknowledge that between the two sexes and all the differences that we have, one of the differences, men are supposed to be strong physically. And I think that we should really lean into that and make sure that we are engaging in heavy resistance exercise frequently. Not that we can't go running, but an interesting study was just published recently finding that men who marathon run a lot actually die more. But that phenomenon did not occur in women. And so while I think it's important that men engage in some aerobic activity from time to time, I strongly feel it should not replace resistance exercise. A fellow, minute for minute, I think would be better spent pushing his muscles to failure than he would be out running along the roads. So anyway, all of this is my long-winded way of saying my thoughts have evolved, particularly with regards to nutrition and even with regards to how I spend my time exercising, that as a busy husband, father, and professional, I don't have as much free time as I used to. And yet by being smarter and more efficient, I am able to get in very effective workouts that are spent mostly fatiguing my muscles rather than out running on a road. Yeah, so part of my evolution, as I noted, was not being afraid of calories. And that's because while energy matters, macronutrients matter more in the overall ratio of what we're consuming. So macronutrients are the big nutrients of the diet, macro being big and nutrient being a nourishing molecule. And the three macronutrients in the diet are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. My research as a scientist has allowed me to gain significant insight into those. And it's ultimately led me to the conclusion that we got it all wrong decades ago when the primary dietary guidelines in the United States in the late 70s, and it quickly was spreading, similar sentiments spreading around the world. When those came to life, they really started causing some of the metabolic problems that we are in. Specifically, we have been taught now for decades that we should eat diets that are primarily carbohydrate based and that we should eat frequently throughout the day. I reject that idea completely. The problem with that model of eating is that you are basing your diet not only on the one macronutrient that is not essential to humans. In other words, you don't need to eat a specific amount of carbohydrates per day to thrive. That doesn't exist. But also that happens to be the macronutrient that spikes the hormone insulin the most. And so by eating a diet that's primarily carbohydrate based, which is spiking blood sugar levels, which is then spiking insulin, and by eating frequently throughout the day, 5 or 6 times a day, as we've been told is ideal through many authorities, it means that the average person is spending every waking moment in a state of elevated insulin. And for men, this is a unique problem because the longer insulin is elevated, the more it's stimulating fat cells to grow. And as in men, as fat cells grow, they begin expressing an enzyme called aromatase. And aromatase is an enzyme that's normally only in high levels in the ovaries in women. And aromatase job is to take testosterone and to convert it into estrogens. And what happens in fat cells for men, as I noted, and this will start to happen more as insulin's elevated, is that the fat cells, as they grow, will literally start to take in testosterone and release and turn it into estrogens. That, of course, starts to cause problems in the fellow with regards to fertility and even lean mass and how he's storing his fat around his body, because it's sex hormones that tell the body where to store fat. Androgens like testosterone or estrogens telling the body to store fat in different places. So that whole idea of basing our diet primarily on carbohydrates, I think not only is causing problems with regards to chronically elevated insulin and the metabolic consequences of that, which is a big part of my research, but even the sexual consequences in men, where he has less testosterone than he should ideally have. But even back one step with regards to insulin resistance, the longer a man has elevated insulin and the more insulin resistant he's becoming, the more insulin resistant his blood vessels become. And that may seem like an irrelevant problem, but in fact, it couldn't be more relevant with regards to men's health. In fact, insulin resistance is the most common cause of erectile dysfunction. And basically, insulin will normally tell blood vessels to dilate. And so that becomes a fundamental process with regards to normal erectile function. Certain blood vessels must dilate to regulate blood flow. However, as the blood vessels become insulin resistant, insulin's attempting to dilate the blood vessel, increasing blood flow, but the blood vessels stay constricted, keeping blood flow to a minimum, resulting in erectile dysfunction, the most common cause of infertility in men. And so kind of across the board, from the level of producing testosterone from the testicles, even to vasodilation and normal erectile function, the further a man is going from metabolic health, the more infertile and more likely he is to experience disruption in normal sexual function. But that's just the one macronutrient that I'd mentioned with regards to the three, that first being carbohydrates, the one that we eat the most of, but I would say we should eat the least of because of the fact that it is literally not necessary for humans to eat. But then the second macronutrients are the ones to focus on. While we are controlling carbohydrates, we want to focus more on prioritizing protein and not being afraid of dietary fat. And with regards to protein, I'll elaborate just briefly. We need to make sure we aren't being seduced by this current trend of avoiding animal protein. We will hear from so many sources that animal protein is bad and ought to be avoided. I would just ask anyone to question that conclusion. Humans are evolved or created to eat meat and protein from animal sources, be it dairy or meat or eggs. Those are the most biologically accessible proteins in the entire planet. And those are the ones we should eat. We absorb them better, and they have a better profile of amino acids to help the body retain muscle mass and bone mass. Interestingly, in nature, every one of those animal proteins that are the best for humans to eat come with fat, and that's how we should eat it. When we eat fat with the protein, we digest the protein better. And moreover, when they are consumed together, they are more anabolic. Fat and protein will build muscle better than just protein alone. And I think there's a lesson there that we learn or we've forgotten from nature, which is, as I said, in nature, there's no such thing as an isolated protein. Protein always comes with fat, and that's how we should eat it. We will absorb it better, and it will be more muscle building than the same amount of protein alone. So that's how fellas should eat. We need to keep our muscle, we need to challenge our muscles, and we need to nourish the muscles accordingly with making sure we're eating adequate and high quality protein and the fat that comes with it naturally. Let's not try to trim it off or skim it off, but eat it and enjoy it. I think the key for men to age is to not go into a caloric restriction, because the further someone is reducing calories, the harder it's going to be to keep any kind of mass, including lean mass. And for everyone to age well, and I would say especially men, and maybe especially just because I have such a kind of traditional view of men needing to be strong and capable for their families and their communities, make sure you're eating a lot of good protein and fat, and not skimming that off, and you're really leaning into it, a lot of protein and fat, and lifting weights or doing some other kind of resistance training so that the muscle is being worked to exhaustion. I feel very, very strongly about that. And there are all kinds of ways to do that. Ranging from the kind of complicated strategies of you're in the gym in the squat rack or with dumbbells, or you are out on a pull-up bar and you're just doing a series of pull-ups and push-ups, which is actually how I primarily do my workouts, and then different types of workouts for my legs. But whatever it may be, my piece of advice is to be mindful of the time under tension. And I don't mean to spend too much time talking about exercise and weightlifting, because that's not my forte as a scientist, but it is my forte as just a fellow who studied it and who's practiced and experimented. But the important variable I would submit is time under tension. That if you guys, if you're lifting weights and you find it sometimes difficult to move the weight, then go to a lighter weight and increase the angle. Where if you're doing chest work, for example, get to the point where the chest is maximally stretched, and then hold that tension. I think it's really, really beneficial to have workouts that are splitting between dynamic movements, just a bench press or a push-up's an easy example, and then static, where you're getting to the point of maximum stretch with those muscles and then holding it there until you can't hold it, maybe for a minute or so. But all of it is just reflective of this theme of maximizing the time under tension. So more important than how many repetitions you're doing, how many times you're doing the exercise, is how long were the muscles being worked and exhausted. But if you can, if we can be pushing our muscles to exhaustion, it's a good way for we fellas to just know that we're going to be growing our muscles, or as we get into older age, we're going to be keeping them as long as possible, because it's muscle mass that is one of the greatest predictors of mortality, and inversely so. In other words, the more muscle a guy has, the longer and better, and a gal, the longer and better he's going to live. The less muscle he has, the shorter and more miserable his life is going to be. He's going to be frail, weak, and easy to kill, even if it's just an accident or a fall. Absolutely. I think it's very, very important for women to undergo the same kind of workout that she might think of as only her bloke is doing, where she wants to go and get on the elliptical machine and he wants to go lift weights. I strongly believe a woman would be much, much better served minute for minute by lifting weights, because the same mortality risk applies to her. The data that I was mentioning with regards to the inverse relationship between muscle mass and mortality, it's actually across both sexes. That's not just a man thing. It's very much a man and a woman phenomenon, where the more muscle that the woman has, the harder it is to kill her. And I don't mean you're being hunted. So it might be a silly way of saying it, but I kind of like it, because we do live in a dangerous world and bad things happen. We want to be hard to kill, whether it's because of an infection, like a virus or a bacteria, whether it's because of a fall or an impact of some kind, whatever it may be. The more muscle we have, the harder we are going to be to kill, and that'll help us live longer and better. So very much so, everything I'd said with regards to nutrition in men and making sure you're getting enough protein and fat in the diet, I absolutely believe the same principles apply to women. Yeah, what a compelling thought. What are we doing to make sure we don't become rigid in our thinking? I strongly believe everyone should think like a scientist. And that might sound smug, because I am one, and I don't mean to aggrandize my own profession, although it's very noble. But a scientist is a seeker of truth. And I will never forget when my PhD mentor told me that. I had come to him with this, hanging head. I was so disappointed that the experiment I'd done found no positive result. In other words, there was no difference. And he had said, Ben, don't be discouraged. This is truth. We're just trying to find truth. That's what a scientist is. I've never forgotten that. And I've thought about it in every aspect of my life. If we could all be seekers of truth, there is a beautiful sentiment there of meekness or humility. And the humility to admit when something we thought was right ends up being wrong. Much to my dismay and worry, this idea is becoming increasingly rare in today's world, where people are very proud of whatever they feel. They want to brag about whatever they feel. And they, even more with regards to science, people are nowadays ardently claiming, I believe the science. And that is a terrifically unscientific viewpoint. We should all be humble enough to say, this is what I think at the moment. But if I see evidence that is contrary to what I thought I know, then I need to be prepared to look at it and appreciate it and ask whether this, in fact, might be more valid than the conception that I'd been holding on to, whatever it may be. So for me, this extends into across all aspects of life, this idea of being a meek, teachable individual. Whether it's teachable through an individual, something I might have taught today, it resonates or allows someone to challenge what they thought they know and now they want to learn more, or whether it's through our own life experiences. And of course, interacting with our communities and our families helps us learn those lessons, much to our dismay sometimes. But it's all the more reason not to try to retreat from the problems of the world, particularly those that are close to home. We need these experiences to help us know whether what we're understanding is real or not. And to me, seeking truth, I do believe, and I don't mean for this to sound like some ardent proclamation of faith, I do believe in truth. Even that, though, is a sentiment that some people don't nowadays, that they think it's relative, that, well, truth is whatever your lived experience is. I think that's just silly. Maybe because I'm a scientist. I think there are things that are real. And these are things that we can touch and experiments that we can conduct. And some things are just as real, but less tangible, which is the lesson, for example, that as a father, if I react to my children in anger, it is an absolute truth that the situation will get worse. That is absolutely true. I've learned that. In fact, I've learned that lesson so thoroughly that the idea of responding in anger to my wife isn't even a possibility now, because I've learned so early how horrifically that goes for me. So whatever happens with my wife, there's never any anger from me. She can be angry, but I can't, because things just get worse, because she'll always respond with more anger. But with my kids, I know that is an absolute truth to me, that if something has happened and I respond with anger, it will absolutely get worse. If I respond calmly and kindly, it will be better. That is a truth to me, just as real as going across this hallway to my lab and doing something to some cells in a little petri dish and testing the outcome. So the idea of challenging what we think we know, which was your question, it behooves every one of us to be humble and always trying to understand the reality of any situation, whether it is, I was told that saturated fat is bad, and now I don't believe that it is. For example, that was very much an evolution in my thinking, or whether it is something more personal or more with regards to the emotional health of an individual, which is, a little less tangible, but still real nonetheless. My view is that we should be humble and meek. That doesn't mean we're weak. That's not the same. Being humble and meek can occur in a very strong, capable, confident person, but it means that we listen, we seek first to understand when we're in an interaction, and then to be understood. That doesn't mean we're weak. It just means we respect other people and we're humble and meek, where we want to learn, we want to understand. That is an increasingly short supply, and the world needs more strong and humble and stoic men who know how to bear a burden without complaining and know how to react to a situation without overreacting, and to know their role in the family and the community. The more strong, loving men the world has, the better the world is going to be.